On a cold autumn night in 2009, deep in the wild Knapdale forest of Western Scotland, biologist Simon Jones and his colleagues made a decision that seemed almost insane. They released 11 giant rats into a land where their species had been exterminated by humans for more than 400 years. After 4 centuries of humans damaging nature, turning soft rivers into harsh concrete channels, and suffering countless disastrous flash floods, people placed the ambition of repairing an entire era's mistake onto the backs of these 11 small creatures. But nature has never been gentle with pioneers. Only a few hours after leaving its metal cage, a male beaver carrying the codename Telemark suddenly collapsed beside the rocks, taking its last breath before it had even built a lodge. Failure came too quickly. The ecological restoration project of an entire nation stood on the edge of total collapse before it had even truly begun. At first, Simon Jones only dared to expect very modest changes, a few small ponds, or the return of several insect species. But he had no idea that the surviving beavers were about to push this project into a scenario no expert could have predicted. Was this an ecological rescue? Or, actually, the beginning of a new disaster? Before we enter the story of what happened to these 11 beavers, tell me this: where are you watching this video from? And where you live, are beavers seen as friends of the ecosystem, or animals that specialize in causing trouble? Many centuries ago, the rivers of Scotland flowed with a rhythm completely different from today. Water did not rush away violently. It slipped gently through dense forests. The current was held back by thousands of ancient beaver dams, turning small streams into a network of wetlands, shallow ponds, and tangled side channels like blood vessels. Beavers were once an inseparable part of the natural life here, but their very presence became their death sentence. Their thick, smooth fur was hunted fiercely to make felt hats for Europe's upper class. Their meat became food on banquet tables, and especially castoreum, the intensely fragrant secretion taken from the beaver's scent glands, was extracted for expensive medicines and perfumes. By the late 1500s, the last beaver collapsed on a cold streambank. Extinction did not arrive with a loud explosion. It sank into a silence that lasted 400 years. But what happened after beavers disappeared was the real disaster. It was the quiet removal of a force that had shaped the face of the earth for thousands of years. No one remained to reinforce and repair the structures each night. Ancient dams burst apart and the water drained away. Rivers lost their soft curves. They became straight, impatient, and angry. Whenever rain poured down, water falling onto the hillsides no longer had any friction brake to hold it back. It rushed straight into narrow river channels, tore away floodplain soil, ripped open the banks, and became destructive flash floods downstream. By summer, all the water had been flushed out to sea, leaving riverbeds as dry strips of stone. The rich, temperate rainforests of Western Scotland shrank into isolated fragments. Wetlands disappeared, bringing with them a cruel silence. The songs of countless birds stopped, the buzzing of insects faded, and wildflower carpets along the rivers died back. By 1900, across all of Europe and Asia, from a population of hundreds of millions, only about 1,200 beavers survived in scattered places. 4 centuries passed. Generations of Scottish people were born and raised without ever knowing the world beavers had once built. The idea that an animal could design a river became a distant folk legend. The map of Scotland was covered with stiff, straight blue lines. People came to accept the anger and dryness of rivers as something natural. Only near the end of the 20th century did Simon Jones and a small group of scientists and historians begin reopening old records. They pieced together evidence of vanished wetlands. They asked themselves, Could the disappearance of beavers have been the trigger for this chain of ecological collapse? And could a wound lasting centuries be healed? In 2008, after years of fierce debate, the Scottish government officially granted permission for the first mammal reintroduction project in British history. But this was not a release them and pray experiment. It was the most tightly monitored ecological surgery in history. In May 2009, 11 beavers, including our central character, were captured from Telemark, Norway, crossed the sea and arrived in Knapdale. After several weeks of quarantine, they were divided into small groups and released into 3 locks connected by winding streams. The entire 44 square kilometre trial area became a giant laboratory. Hydrologists installed pressure sensors and flow meters along every small stream. They measured each chemical indicator in the water, counted every dragonfly hovering over the locks, marked every tree base, counted every school of salmon, and set up rows of infrared camera traps operating 24/7. If the beavers failed or caused damage, the project would be cancelled immediately and all the beavers would be removed. And then, as the first light showers of the season began falling over Knapdale, the Telemark beaver began its shift. Look at how it worked through the night. With no engineering plan, no machinery, it moved toward a streamside sapling, with precise bites from 2 orange front teeth harder than copper, and let it felled the small trunk in only a few minutes. Using its plump but extremely flexible front feet, it dragged the branches down into the fast-flowing stream. It did not stack wood randomly. The beaver drove larger branches into the streambed against the direction of the current to create a load-bearing frame. Then it wove smaller branches across them, used its front feet to scoop up sticky mud from the lakebed, mixed it with roots and dry leaves, and carefully sealed every gap. It dove to the base of the structure, slapped the water lightly with its tail, listened for the sound of leaks, then kept packing mud to reinforce the dam. By the next morning, when forestry workers entered the woods, their feet sank into ground that had once been hard and dry. Before them stood the first dam wedged firmly between 2 oak roots. The stream that had rushed downhill yesterday was now braked. Water growled against the wooden wall, but could not break it, and had no choice but to slow down. With each passing night, the dam stretched a little farther. By the second year, the changes could no longer be ignored. What had once been a single steep stream flowing down into a loch had become a rich maze of water. The number of dams rose from 3 to 5, then to more than a dozen. Some were only small piles of branches, but others rose as high as an adult's knee, creating little murmuring waterfalls. Behind each dam, water rose and spread outward to both sides. It flowed into dry hollows that had been abandoned for decades. The land softened like a giant sponge. Young willow and birch began sprouting in places once taken over by weeds. Sage and iris covered the soft mudflats. Within a short time, frogs and amphibians returned to lay eggs. Bright damselflies appeared. The hoofprints of deer herds pressed thickly into the soft mud as they came to drink. The wooden dams of beavers were not fixed structures. They breathed with the river. When a large flood broke part of a dam the very next night, the Telemark beaver patiently carried wood back out to reinforce it stronger than before. The old, straight and brutal drainage route had completely disappeared. In its place was a living wetland network, reflecting the sky in thousands of different shades. Human engineers, the same people who had spent decades designing concrete water control structures, now stood silent on the streambank, notebooks in hand, stunned as they studied a blueprint made from mud and dry branches. But just as the songs of celebration were rising in Knapdale, a storm of fierce controversy broke out across Scotland, the Atlantic salmon problem. Salmon are the emperors of Scotland's economy and culture. Every year, schools of salmon must swim upstream from the deep ocean back to sweet headwater streams to spawn. When the wooden dams of Beavers began rising like barriers, sport anglers and economists turned pale. They asked a suffocating question: how could a salmon jump over a sealed wall of wood and mud if beavers blocked the migration journey? Of salmon, would saving one rodent species mean signing a death sentence for a salmon industry worth millions of pounds? Researchers immediately rushed into the water, and the results shattered every fear. Beaver dams are not concrete dams. They are naturally leaky structures. When the rainy season comes, water rises and spills over the top of the dam, creating beautiful hydraulic steps, places where adult salmon can launch themselves across with ease. Even better field data showed that in areas with beavers, young salmon grew more strongly than ever before. The deep, calm ponds created by beavers became safe shelters, helping young salmon avoid violent winter flood currents and providing them with a rich supply of insects. They grew faster and stronger before swimming out to the open sea. The verdict against beavers turned into a declaration of alliance. They do not destroy salmon, they create homes for salmon. However, just as the salmon conflict temporarily quieted down, another battle, hundreds of times more intense, broke out this time on farmers' fields. While scientists were focused on monitoring the 11 beavers in Knapdale, in eastern Scotland in the Tayside region, an uncontrolled incident had taken place. A beaver population that had escaped illegally from private collections had quietly multiplied. By 2012, people discovered 39 beaver families, with around 150 individuals. By 2021, that number had exploded to nearly 1,000. The nightmare of Tayside farmers had begun. In a single night, beavers built dams, blocking agricultural drainage ditches. The next morning, fertile barley and potato fields were submerged under muddy water. Expensive tractors sank into underground burrows that beavers had dug along riverbanks. They felled valuable commercial timber trees and turned farmland into wetlands. Anger erupted in local halls. Ecological benefits belonged to the future, but economic damage was the present-day tears of farmers. Tense clashes unfolded between conservationists and farming communities. The Scottish government was caught in a pincer. To solve the problem, engineers had to create devices that had never been used before. Beaver Deceiver pipes a system of plastic tubes running underground through beaver dams to automatically regulate water levels without the beavers realizing it. At the same time, the government had to pay crop compensation and issue permits to relocate beaver families, causing serious damage. The question was no longer, are beavers good at what they do? The question became, are humans wise enough to share living space with them? Despite the fierce controversy, scientific data collected after 5 years of continuous monitoring poured cold water on the skeptics. The numbers from the University of Exeter spoke, and they made the entire engineering world take off its hat. Water lingered in the landscape longer than any computer model or Excel spreadsheet could predict. More than 100 beaver dams, some stretching over 30 meters, stepped down the Scottish valleys like staircases. Each dam functioned like a natural break. Research on 1,000 rainfall events across 4 beaver areas in Britain produced shocking figures. Beaver dams can reduce flood peaks by up to 60%. In Devon wetlands created by beavers held back more than 24 million litres of water, equivalent to the capacity of 10 Olympic competition swimming pools. During extreme heavy rain events, floodwater flow downstream, fell by an average of 30%. Water no longer rushed straight downstream to cause destruction. It seeped sideways, recharged groundwater, and nourished natural channels that had been dry for generations. Soil and chemical fertilizer washed from fields were trapped completely behind the dams, helping the water flowing downstream become crystal clear. The head hydrology researcher shook his head in front of the computer screen. Our most advanced computer models could not fully recreate what the beavers achieved in reality. An expensive lesson for concrete engineers, beavers had built a self-operating, self-repairing system that adapted to weather and exceeded every human prediction. Seeing this undeniable evidence, in May 2019, the Scottish Parliament passed a historic law placing beavers on the list of species strictly protected under European law, on the same level as dolphins, wildcats, and otters. From the original 11 individuals, Scotland's beaver population has now passed the mark of 2,000. But the wildest turning point of the 21st century did not stop there. It happened in October 2023. Beavers moved straight into the heart of London. At Paradise Fields, an ecological area right beside the busy Greenford Underground station in West London, Costons Brook had long been an urban flooding nightmare for authorities. Whenever heavy rain fell, water overflowed its banks, threatening to bury the railway system and nearby homes. Instead of spending tens of millions of pounds pouring concrete for underground storm drains, the Ealing Beaver Project released a beaver family directly into the middle of the megacity, amid the echo of train horns and the roar of traffic in the streets. The beaver family quietly built 5 strong dams. When heavy rainstorms poured down on London, these dams held thousands of cubic meters of water inside the park, gently releasing small flows downstream. Greenford Station infrastructure remained completely safe without spending a single penny operating storm sewers. From wild streams, beavers officially became part of urban green infrastructure, in the heart of one of the most modern megacities in the world. This recovery story closes with a miraculous moment in one of Scotland's most sacred landscapes. From October 2025 to February 2026, a historic relocation campaign brought beaver families live at Loch Byne and Medhoyne, inside Glen Affric National Nature Reserve, the heart of the Scottish Highlands. Scientists held their breath while watching through hidden cameras. The snow-covered winter passed. On a late afternoon in July 2026, a camera trap captured a frame that shook the conservation world on the mirror-still surface of Glen Affric, the mother beaver slowly cut through the water. And right behind her, 2 tiny shadows paddled along 2 baby beavers, only 2 months old. They were the first beaver kits born completely naturally in the Scottish Highlands, after more than 400 dark years. Those 2 tiny creatures were the strongest declaration of all the beaver had officially reclaimed its ancient home. Looking back at the journey from 11 lonely beavers in Knapdale in 2009 to the strong population of today, we recognize a lesson that goes far beyond one animal. Project. For centuries, humans have considered themselves the greatest engineers on Earth. We gave ourselves the right to straighten rivers, pour millions of tons of concrete to lock water in place, and fight against the complexity of nature. But what we received in return was climate change destructive flash floods and dead rivers. The beavers proved a humbling truth. Sometimes the best engineering is not engineering created by humans. It is knowing how to remember what nature has already mastered for millions of years. Water does not need to be tied down or controlled by concrete. Water needs to be slowed, stored, and released naturally. And when you remove the native engineers that shaped the earth, you do not receive freedom, you receive collapse. Scotland's rivers did not become better when beavers disappeared. They became worse for 4 centuries. And now, for the first time in 400 years, they are coming back to life, not because humans built more great structures, but because we learned how to step back and return the builder's hammer to nature's original engineers. And finally, let us know in your area, Is there any animal that was once removed by humans but is now being brought back to restore nature? The species you comment today could become the next story on this channel.